Week 3 of the NFL season is in the books, and even as I record this, Week 4 is just getting started. That is, if you can count the Jets playing against what's left of the Broncos as NFL football. But as always, before I get to my predictions for Week 4, it's only fair that I go over where I went wrong in Week 3. Overall, I had another pretty decent week going 10-5-1, although that being said, that one was the tie between Philadelphia and Cincinnati, and to be honest, don't we all just kind of lose with a game like that? So let's just call it 10-6. Although I suppose if you're a fan of one of the other teams in the Eagles division, you probably enjoyed the outcome. Other than that though, on Thursday Night Football, I picked the mustache over the beard. But what I forgot to take into account when picking this game was the fact that when it comes to unexplainable quarterback wizardry in the NFL for teams that just aren't that good, Ryan Fitzpatrick still does have quite a bit more experience than Gardner Minshew. Although that being said, Minshew is well on his way to taking over that throne. But probably the most surprising part of this game was that now, even though we do have our first outbreak of COVID in the NFL, it didn't happen on either one of these teams. Even as the state of Florida continues to do, well, Florida things. I did correctly pick the Falcons and Bears, at least for the first 3 quarters anyway, and I did miss on taking the upset of the Texans over the Steelers, but I did get Lions over the Cardinals right, so I'll take a 1-1 over those 2 games. With Green Bay and New Orleans, once again, I was absolutely correct that the Green Bay Packers would fall off their 40 points a game pace, falling all the way down to 37 points, although that was enough to hold off the Saints. And I did also get Chiefs and Ravens wrong, but admittedly I spent most of that game watching Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals, so it's hard to say whether or not that game actually happened. But from what I've heard, the AFC is now already decided and the Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. Unless, of course, the Bills decide to actually show up in the playoffs. But once again, as it is still early in the season and with the number of injuries each week is crazier than the last, I'll take a 10-6 record. But I do have to say that just by looking at the matchups for Week 4, I should probably be aiming a little bit higher this time around. Either way, let's see how it goes. One more thing before we get to the picks. As always, if you do find yourself enjoying this video and you like to enjoy things, then the subscribe button is down there. We start off with Thursday Night Football, and even though I forgot to include it in last week's video, I'm going to put it in this one, even if it isn't necessarily going to be the best game of the week. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the game is actually on right now as I'm recording this video, on the other side of the camera actually, so if you catch me looking away from the camera, that's probably what it is. Although that being said, this is again not the most captivating game, so it probably won't be too much of a problem. And even though the Broncos continue to race the 49ers to see which team can be the most injured at the end of the season, I still don't think that the Jets are good enough to be able to beat their B team. That being said though, this is probably one of the Jets' best chances to get a win on the season, even though they do face the Dolphins twice. And for Denver, if the 49ers are right about this turf at MetLife Stadium, then they will be lucky to just get out of this game with still being able to field a full team. I will say this for the Broncos though, I don't think I've ever heard of a better name for a quarterback than Brett Rippon. And just as I say that, touchdown pass to Jerry Jeudy. And as we get into the Sunday games, we start with Seattle at Miami. And even though for Seattle they didn't play at MetLife Stadium last week, they did still suffer a number of injuries. Most notably to Chris Carson, who suffered a dirty gator roll to the knee, but still could come back this week. And to Jamal Adams, who had a non-contact injury to his groin, which I have to say, if Jamal Adams was going to get hurt this season, I didn't think it was going to come on a non-contact play. But again, I suppose it's good news for the Seahawks that even though Jamal might not be ready for the Miami game, he should be ready down the road. It's also good news for the Seahawks that even though their defense has yet to play a full 4 quarters of football, they are playing against an offense now that will not be able to put up points quite as fast as Dak Prescott or Cam Newton were able to in the last 2 weeks. So they should be able to come away with a pretty easy victory here because even despite the number of players that are hurt, one guy that's still healthy is MVP favorite Russell Wilson. And yes, even though second-year receiver DK Metcalf did get Wednesday off due to veteran rest, he will be healthy and ready to play. I have the Seahawks winning this one 41-27, although I have to admit that part of the reason for that margin of victory is that I am just kind of hoping that I don't have to worry about my heart due to stress levels at the end of this game. Next up is the Colts going to the Windy City in what I think is one of the hardest games to predict, although for the most part that's because Indianapolis seems to be a different team each week, and the Bears are inexplicably 3-0. But I'm going to end up picking the Bears to win this game 24-20 for the very same reason that they ended up proving me wrong and beating the Falcons in Week 3. Because although I was right about the fact that the Falcons offense was probably going to put the Bears in a bit of a hole, what I didn't expect was that the Bears would then actually make the change from their struggling young quarterback to their Super Bowl winning veteran quarterback. And so, barring another unexpected change at quarterback, I'm going to pick Nick Foles and the Bears to win this game and send the Bears to a very surprising 4-0. With Cincinnati and Jacksonville, to be honest, I've done these picks a couple of times up until now, and each time I've picked this game differently. largely because this is two exciting young quarterbacks and two terrible defenses and, to be honest, terrible teams around them. So whoever wins this game is pretty much a coin toss. That being said, I do think that the momentum coming into this catfight is with Burrow and the Bengals, so I'm going to end up picking them even with the Jaguars coming off of a little bit of extra rest. The Bengals win 31-28. With Cleveland going to Dallas, if Baker Mayfield and the Browns are ever going to prove that they are deserving of all the hype that this team has been getting for the last year and a half, then this is exactly the type of game that they have to win in order to do that. But even with all that said, I am still going to pick what I think is the more talented team in the Dallas Cowboys, even with that horrendous secondary facing up against Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. So once again, the Cowboys are in a shootout, but this time they come out on top, 37-30. With New Orleans at Detroit, even if it turns out that Drew Brees can't throw the ball past 20 yards anymore, I'm not sure that he's going to have to in order to torch this Lions defense. And although I still do believe in the Lions offense and their ability to put up at least a few points, it's not going to be anywhere near enough as New Orleans ends up winning this game 38-24. With the Chargers and Bucks, I have to admit that I am fully aboard the Justin Herbert bandwagon, and I think the future for the Chargers with this young quarterback is a bright one. But with all that being said, I don't think that they're going to be able to overcome Tom Brady and this Buccaneers offense that is clearly starting to click. Bucks win 31-20. For better or worse, I don't really think of myself as someone that has a whole lot of hot takes, and while I'm not sure if this necessarily counts, here is one. If the Ravens don't absolutely blow out the DC football team, the Steelers are winning the North. And although realistically, regardless of the outcome of this game, the North is far from over, I do think the Ravens are going to have their way in this one, winning 37-14. With Arizona and Carolina, the Cardinals defense finally started to show its true colors in week 3, and if Christian McCaffrey had been in this game, I think it could have been a fairly exciting one to see what he could have done against this defense. But he's not, and the Cardinals are definitely a better team, so they're going to win this one 31-19. With Minnesota going to Houston, these are absolutely the two best 0-3 teams in all of the NFL. That being said, they are still both 0-3, and that is a tough place to be, even with 7 teams going from each conference to the playoffs this year. Ooh, that was a nice throw from Rippin. Coming into the year, I thought that these were both absolutely playoff teams. But now 3 weeks in, they might be playing a game to see who can stay alive in the playoff hunt, even 4 weeks in. And for the Vikings, especially considering they're in a division with 2 still undefeated teams in the Packers and Bears, they really need this win in order to get on the board in the win column. And although still being far from mathematically eliminated, at 0-4, I think the Vikings season would be pretty much done. Meanwhile, with the Texans, although it does still have to be said that they're in a tough spot being 3 games down to the Titans in the division, it is a little bit more understandable how they found their way to 0-3, having played against maybe the 3 best teams in the conference. Fortunately for them though, they do still have yet to play a game in the division, so there is still some time to make up that ground. Which again is a good thing considering, unfortunately, I do think that they're going to end up losing this game to the Vikings 20-17. With the Giants and Rams, this is the Rams' chance to bounce back from a game that they feel like they got stolen from them by the refs, which has to be said, even if it's true, is a little bit rich coming from the Rams. Either way though, this should be a game where they have a chance to show off their strengths and win fairly comfortably. And if they don't, well, maybe that shows that there is still some weaknesses on this Rams team. Either way though, this should be a game that they win, whether it's close or not. I've got them winning 27-13. Bills-Raiders could be one of the more fun games of this week, and I do think the Raiders have a chance to win this one, given a few plays where Josh Allen tries to make a little bit too much happen and ends up turning over the ball. But with that said, as evidenced by his AFC Player of the Month award, Josh Allen has been a lot better so far this season about limiting those questionable plays that he made towards the end of last year. And if he can continue to do that, especially given the fact that the Bills have the better defense in this game, he should be able to help this team get to their 4th win, winning 32-24. And that brings us to what I absolutely think is the game of the week, as the Patriots go to Kansas City to play the Chiefs. On Monday night, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs proved in a fairly convincing win over the Ravens that they are still the team to beat in the AFC. But with that said, even though most of us had hoped that the Patriots would fall apart without Tom Brady, as I kind of expected, it is still clear that they are very much a contender in the AFC. And although I do think that the Chiefs are going to win this game, and I do still think that the Bills are the best team in the AFC East, I do think that if there is a team that's going to knock off the Chiefs this year, especially now that the Ravens proved it wasn't going to be them, I do think that the Patriots might be the team that has the best chance to do that. And even though the Chargers did take the Chiefs to overtime, I do think that it's going to take a good team to beat the Chiefs. But aside from the Chiefs having another underperforming game, it's going to take a team that has a good defense and can slow down this Chiefs' ridiculous offense in order for them to lose. And in spite of what Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf were able to do to this very talented New England defense, this is still very much a secondary that should be able to keep up with the Chiefs. But most importantly, what we learned from Monday night is that it's going to take more than just a good defense to beat this team. It's also going to take some very good and creative game planning, which if there is a coach that knows how to take away the best player on any given team, it's definitely Bill Belichick. And as for the winner, once again, I will take the Chiefs, 30-27. As we come to Sunday Night Football, once again, the story of the 49ers season is how ugly it has been for them from the injury perspective. Although, fortunately, they did seem to somehow survive having at least some of their players make it out of MetLife for a second week in a row, as they beat their own personal demons in the MetLife turf, and also en route managed to beat the Giants fairly handily. But even with a 2-1 record, it has been far from an ideal start to a season for the 49ers. But with that said, it has still been probably a considerably better start than that of what their opponent has had in the Philadelphia Eagles. Because while the 49ers were able to overcome their toughest opponent of the last 2 weeks in New York's AstroTurf, the Eagles have yet to overcome their toughest opponent, which seems to be themselves. And so, even though over the years Levi Stadium's grass field has been far from free of its own criticism, it is at least not the field that the 49ers seem to fear so much, so they should at least now be able to finally focus on their opponent. Meanwhile, the Eagles have yet to get out of their own way, and they're gonna have to do that before I pick them against a team like the 49ers. So I am picking the 49ers to win this one, 31-20. Of course, that finally brings us to Monday Night Football and the Falcons versus the Packers. And if you are a Falcons fan, I actually have some good news for you with this game. For the first time in 3 weeks, I don't think that the Falcons will be able to blow a 99% chance of victory to end up losing. Of course, the bad news is that is because I don't think the Falcons will have that kind of a lead, or really any lead at all, over the Packers in this game, as I do think the Packers will end up winning this game fairly comfortably. Although, I mean, if you still are somehow a Falcons fan and you have an idea that your team's going to lose anyway, wouldn't you rather kind of know it the entire game than have your team expertly grasp defeat from the jaws of victory at the very end? Either way, though, I have the Packers winning this one, 38-27. And if there are any Falcons fans watching this, if it helps, I will be cheering for you to win this, even though if Dan Quinn does get fired, I wouldn't mind seeing him back on the sidelines for the Seahawks, as the defensive coordinator, to be clear. Now, there is one other game that was supposed to happen this week, but instead it's getting postponed due to the first outbreak of COVID in the NFL. And that is, unfortunately, what should have been one of the best games of the week in the Titans versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a game that, honestly, going into the season, I thought was going to be a pivotal one in the wild card race for the AFC. But instead, these are both teams that look like they could be vying to win their respective divisions. We still don't know when the NFL plans on making up this game. It could be in week 7 when the Titans have their bye week, or maybe the NFL will end up making a week 18 just for games, which this might not be the only one this season, that end up getting postponed towards another date. Either way though, week 4, which is a week that doesn't have all that many interesting matchups, gets robbed of one of its best games. But this still will be absolutely one of the games to be watching, and a very interesting one when it does eventually happen. If it does eventually happen. That does bring me to the end of my week 4 picks though, so as always, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, or maybe even enjoyed it, the thumbs up button is down there, and so is the subscribe one if you haven't clicked that yet. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts on week 4 and what your predictions for some of these games, or what might happen to Tennessee and Pittsburgh down the road will be. Otherwise, I hope to see you next time. Stay safe out there, and be good to each other. Peace.